we'll move along. On this day in history, it's kind of a World War II kind of day. June 4th, 1940, the British completed the evacuation of more than 300,000 troops from Dunkirk. In 1944, the German submarine U-505 became the first one captured by the U.S. Navy. That's the submarine that is on exhibit in the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. I remember going to see that, I think I was in high school, maybe, but it was really interesting. You can take a tour down inside this thing, and it's unbelievable that, German sailors would sail these things, under the sea. They caused a lot of destruction in World War II, but it was really interesting to see how the thing was built and how it was operated. Also, the same day in 1944, Allied troops liberated Rome, and on their way to Berlin, and the end of the war then in spring of 45. In 1946, Juan Perón was installed as president of Argentina, and I guess Evita began her reign as well. And in 1953, North Korea accepted all of the United Nations proposals to end the conflict in the Korean Peninsula, known as the Korean War. That's all I've got on my agenda so far. I'll turn it over to Gary to introduce our speaker today. Gary? And I will mute everybody else so that there's no background noise to interrupt the speaker.
Thanks, Jerry. Going through what we're going through right now has been a big hassle with everybody here in town and all over the country, and of course all over the world. But I wanted to invite Dr. Scott Bowling, who's the superintendent of schools for the Crawfordsville Community School Corporation, to come and talk to us today. Scott graduated with an engineering degree from Rose-Hulman. So we got another engineer rather than another lawyer, so that's good. And then decided to devote his career to public education. Served as a math teacher, assistant principal, business manager, assistant superintendent, and now superintendent for the Crawfordsville Community School Corporation. I hope you learned some from the history that you gave us today, Jerry, but Dr. Bowling, welcome, and glad to have you here with us today.
Hey, I really appreciate that. It's great to see that everybody connections going, even in the midst of what we're going through. I've had a lot of these types of meetings, and hadn't had any, of course, before all this hit. And our principals and our teachers have become pretty accustomed to this. We've even interviewed teachers. This is the format that we use. We use Zoom to interview our teachers, at least during this period of time. So it definitely has been an interesting time. What I thought I'd do today is just walk through what we went through and where we're headed, and then would be happy to take any questions from inquiring minds. If anything about schools strikes your curiosity, whether it's related to what we're dealing with the pandemic or not. So back on February the 29th, that was a Saturday, and I happened to be watching the news, and I saw where I'd heard bits and pieces about this virus over in China, and on Saturday they were talking about how China had decided to shut down the country, or at least that region in Wuhan. And this was not the lead story. I don't remember what the lead story was that day. This was about halfway through the broadcast, or even on the back half of the broadcast. And I thought, wow, this thing over in China, it's getting pretty big if they're wanting to shut down. And I sent this text message to my principals. I think it's interesting for context. I sent them, I said, this would be a worst case scenario and probably wouldn't ever happen. That said, be thinking about how we might be able to do distance learning if we had to shut schools down completely for a month. I just wanted them kind of thinking about that. Again, this is February 29th. We haven't even had the first case of coronavirus in the United States yet. But I saw where they had shut that country down, and I thought, boy, what if this thing gets out of hand? Really just thought of it as a thought exercise, maybe for the future, or if potentially this problem got out of hand. Well, 3 or 4 days later, March 2nd, was when the CDC reported the first case in the United States. And that's when we also sent our first message out to families. And that message basically focused on good hand washing techniques, nothing about school closure. It was just, hey, this virus is, it's been detected in the United States now, appears to be somewhat dangerous, appears to be pretty communicable. Here's some things that you can do at home to make sure that you don't get it. And there were also guidelines in there for, if your student has a fever or has some of these symptoms, please let us know. That's also about the same time that we started pretty heavy contact with the local Montgomery County Health Department. Now, we always have a working relationship with the health department. I'll give you an example. Sometimes we'll have outbreaks of just a stomach bug that, at a school. If that reaches enough of a proportion, the health department will shut us down because it's just too much spreading. So that's our normal contact with them. If we've got a lot of cases of the flu or really anything that kids are going through, we start talking to them about enhanced cleaning procedures, those sorts of things. So it's not like it's uncommon for us to hear from the health department, but with this, it's been much more frequent and intense, as you probably can imagine. But that's when we started talking to them about, what are you hearing about this virus? What do you think that we need to be thinking about? Those sorts of things. And we developed those guidelines, the hand washing, and there was a list of about 15 of them at the time that we asked families to do in conjunction with the health department to control the spread if it did come our way. The big issue at that time, and again, we're sitting on March the 2nd, was we had a group of students scheduled to go to Costa Rica. So you kind of have to put yourself back in time a little bit because, now you wouldn't even, probably consider doing that. But at the time, that was a tough decision. The students had all paid their money. The travel company had said that they would not be issuing refunds. They would be issuing vouchers. But a lot of the students on the trip were seniors. So how do the whole thing, as you can imagine, is built on, seniors and juniors going together as a part of a high school experience. And they are not sending money back to kids. And so we had a big parent meeting to discuss, should we go or shouldn't we go? Ended up deciding that we should not. But at the time, that was a pretty difficult decision. So that's March the 2nd. A week later, on March the 9th, Avon schools over in Hendricks County closed after 2 students tested positive. And now it was starting to get real. On March 9th, we started talking about, okay, and this was with the health department, are we supposed to close if we even get 1 case? How many cases does it take for us to close? Those sorts of discussions, would it be wise to close right now? Those are the kind of discussions that we were having. And when I say we, I will tell you, we're in a good place with schools in the county right now because we all work together. And not that it has been a bad relationship in the past, but Dr. Moran and Dr. Greiner and I have a really good open relationship. We're talking daily, at least right now, but even when things are somewhat normal, we talk all the time and we try to coordinate things. It doesn't always work out, but we do try to coordinate things. So we were having conference calls, the 3 of us, with the health department saying, okay, what's our plan going to be? Now, remember that text that I sent my principals on February the 29th? We're now about, 10 days away from that date. What we decided as a result of that text was, let's start developing some plans in the background in case this thing hits. We weren't alarmists, and of course, we didn't notify students, parents, but as a leadership team, we said, let's get ready just in case. Again, you remember my text message, it's probably not going to happen. But what would we do? What would we do if we had to? So we started thinking about, okay, if we're going to do distance learning, students are going to need devices. How are we going to get them those devices? Those sorts of things. During that period from February 29th until March 9th, we surveyed parents to find out, do you have a device in the home? And the reason we needed to know that is because of the way we do computers and devices at Crawfordsville. Right now, if you're a high school student at Crawfordsville, you get a Chromebook or a laptop, however you want to think about it. And that student gets to take that device home. So for the high school, we're set. Those kids already have devices. At the middle school, we have enough devices for every kid, but because they're middle school kids and teachers develop their curriculum with the thought that students will have access to a computer, we did a take-home model a long time ago when we found that middle school kids couldn't remember to charge the thing, would download things on it that would cause the computer to get viruses. So at the middle school, we've adopted a model where there are computers for every kid, but they don't go home with them. They stay in the classroom. That way they're charged up. We have a bank of 30 computers in every classroom. Kid walks into his math class, picks up a Chromebook and sits down. When he leaves the math class, he puts it back in there. So those students were going to need devices. When you get down into Hoover and Nicholson and Hose for us, those students, we have devices in those schools, enough for about half of the kids, but those are used on a checkout basis. That's where they're on a cart and the teacher just checks them out if they want to use it for that day. So that was our device situation. The reason we wanted to survey people was we wanted to find out how many of you, if we went to distance learning, have a device at home that you can use. You wouldn't need to check out a school device, K through 12. Well, the response rate that we got back indicated that about 10% of our students had no access to a device whatsoever. That kind of surprised us. That's a pretty low number. So it both surprises me and doesn't surprise me, because of course, when you think about doing distance learning, your first question is, well, how do you get a device to every kid? Well, it turns out that most of our kids already had a device, all but about 10% of them. So we started working in the background on, okay, how many, 10%, what does that mean for us? How many machines do we need to go ahead and get ready? And we were conservative and went up to about 20% that we were getting ready in the background to be able to have students check out. Okay, so that that gets us to March 9th in the Avon situation. And now we're thinking we may actually have to close here. On March 10th, we did notify parents that if we were in an Avon type of situation where we had a student test positive, that we would be moving to distance learning. We wanted to give parents a heads up that that was going to be our decision. Not every school did that. They sort of waited around, but we felt like it was important to go ahead and make that decision if we were going to have to shut down, and to give parents a heads up of what we were going to do if we had to shut down. And all the schools in the county did that. When I say other schools, we're aware of quite a few statewide who were not sure quite what to do and did not make a decision at that time in terms of what they were going to do if their schools got shut down. I know some of them, their strategy was going to be that they were just going to ask for a waiver of the number of days from the state, and we're going to just basically not go to school those days, with the thought that the state would say, well, that's okay. You don't have to make those days up. I know that was a strategy that was going around out there. So anyway, we let parents know. So March 9th was the Avon case. March 10th, we told the parents, give them a heads up. March 11th, we implemented new health screening questions in conjunction with the health department for when kids called in sick. So ordinarily when a kid calls in sick, we just say, okay, when we mark them like that, secretary marks them that way for attendance purposes. That changed. And our secretary started asking a group of about 10 questions, because the health department, of course, is trying to figure out, do we have any cases in the county? At this point, March 9th and 10th, we do not have any cases in Montgomery County at all, at least reported at that point in time. So we had these new health screening questions. March 12th, you can see things are going quicker now. Every day something new's happening. March 12th was our board meeting, where I told our board that we might have to consider closing school. Again, the Avon case is hanging out there. That's the response that they had. And I told the board that, you know, we couldn't rule out the possibility that we might have to close school because of COVID. March 13th, the very next day, we closed schools. So, and that was the period of time when cases were just starting to ramp up, you know, and I think because of the Avon situation, schools, not just in Montgomery County, but across the state, started making the decision in conjunction again with their health departments. The health department drove a lot of this, quite frankly, that we would close, and we hoped that we would catch a break because that particular week, that next week, March 16th through 20th, was scheduled to be a regular week of school for us, but then the week after that was spring break. So really it was 2 weeks off for the kids, and we thought maybe by that point, curves flattened, we'll have more information at that point in time. We'll see what the cases look like in Indiana. Surely we'll be able to go back after a week off of school and then spring break. That week off of school, we implemented distance learning that next Monday. So I let parents know Friday that we were indeed closing. That next Monday, kids, instead of going to their regular classes, logged onto their computers and attempted to do distance learning. So that was our first day, was March 16th. That was also our first day that we had students check out devices from Crawfordsville Middle School. So that was our central point. We put out a message to that same message to parents that said that we were closing and moving to distance learning. In that message was, if you need a computer, come to Crawfordsville Middle School from 8 to 4. We'll check one out to you. So we had set up in there for ways for people to check out a device. So that was how we handled the device question. In the end, by the time we were going into full-blown distance learning and we got closed for the whole year, about 200 devices are what we distributed to students. We've got 2,500 students, so it turns out that 10% was about right on. March the 16th was our first day of distance learning. I think it's interesting to note that we had 24 cases in the state of Indiana and 1 death, and no cases yet in Montgomery County. There was nothing really happening here on the ground yet, but the thought was it's coming. And certainly the numbers were getting much higher than that in New York, and that was about the time that Washington State had a big outbreak, if you remember that, in California. So we decided as a school corporation and as all 3 county schools to close for that week. Only 3 days later, March 19th, the governor closed all the schools. Not for the whole year, but through May 1st. And they canceled the state mandated testing that we do in the spring. iStep, if you've heard of that. iStep's now changed to iLearn, but it's the same idea. It's the standardized test that kids take every year. Those were canceled. The governor canceled all schools through May the 1st. And I'll tell you why that was significant. Even schools that had done e-learning in the past had only thought of e-learning as something that they would do for your random snow day, you know, a one-day thing to kind of keep kids up to date and to not have to make it up at the end of the school year. No schools in the state of Indiana had implemented e-learning as a long-term solution. So really every school was having to deal with this. Okay, how do we move from a system where we thought this was just going to be a one-off here or there for the 2 or 3 snow days we had per year to doing weeks of this? And it was really interesting what happened because from a distance learning standpoint, Crawfordsville is in a pretty good location because all of our kids have access at least to internet. I mean, you have to buy it, but you can get it. In a lot of places out in the county, you can't get internet, even if you want to. So when you think about Montgomery County that way, now think about the whole state and how many rural areas, you probably can't really get internet, especially the speed that you need to be able to do things like what we're doing right now via Zoom, because that's what our teachers did, video lessons and things like that. It's a huge problem. So all schools across the state are dealing with how do we do long-term distance learning. March 19th, like I said, the governor closed all the schools. March 20th, we began meal delivery. So I was approached by our bus drivers and our food service department, who said, "Hey, we're not transporting kids anymore. Maybe this is a way that we can help." And honestly, we've got wonderful people that work in our school corporation that, to a person, care deeply about the kids. We may get a bad apple here or there, but I'm telling you, I did not come up with that idea to deliver meals to the kids. That came from our people. So they, on the fly, in a couple of days, developed the system and sent out notifications to parents and said, "Hey, if you need meals delivered, we'll do it." At the height of that meal delivery system, we were delivering 1,600 meals a day through our bus drivers and through our food service department. They would roll in in the morning to our high school and pack those buses full of meals to get out to everybody. So that's March 20th. March 29th is when our connectivity initiative begins. So we have devices for all the kids, but now the next question is, again, how do you get them all internet service? So at each one of our buildings, our principals, secretaries, teachers started developing a list of kids who were saying, "I can't participate because I don't have internet." We developed a list, and then we had people calling them basically every day, and stepping them through the process of getting internet access, because most of the internet providing companies here in town, because of COVID-19, made it available for free for low-income families. They made internet available for free. So, but the only thing was, getting the word out to the right people about how that was happening. Well, that's how we did that. We developed a list and went student by student to make sure that they had access. Now that took a while, but in a matter of a couple of weeks, we had all but a very few of kids without it, with internet access. So we were kind of building the plane on the fly, but that was our connectivity initiative. April 2nd, couple 3 days from that connectivity initiative, the governor closed all the schools for the remainder of the school year. So now we've gone from, we think maybe we'll have to be closed for a week and then we'll get a break from spring break, to, okay, now we're going to be closed till May 1st and we're in long-term e-learning, to now we're closed for the whole year and we are really involved with long-term e-learning. We're going to do this whole quarter basically via distance. So that was obviously a huge deal. On April the 8th, I sent a message out to parents because the feedback that we had been getting was that distance learning was difficult on everyone. And of course, teachers are trying to find their way in that system. Students are trying to find their way in that new system. But the feedback that we were getting was it was pretty overwhelming on the student end of things. For some, if not most, students. Some students were thriving with it, but others it was more difficult. And for those of you that haven't taken a distance learning class or anything like that before, it is different. It's much more like a correspondence course. It's not like when you come in that, you think about your school days, you come in and the teacher tells you to do this and then this and then this. I'll tell you, even for me, I need that accountability, and especially I needed it as a kid, and I needed that structure. Distance learning, it's impossible for the teacher to do that. So they're putting that content out there and they have that assignment. And you think about it with yourself, if you've got that assignment and it's a math assignment and you get to that first problem that you can't solve, and there's no way to raise your hand, or there's no way to ask your neighbor, there's no way to get you past that, that can get pretty frustrating pretty quickly. So we had kids spending a ton of time. It's just different. Distance learning is just different. So acknowledging that, we did decrease the workload. So we told our teachers, hey, let's scale back from what we normally would expect. Let's make sure that this is a reasonable workload on people, and we'll just try to do the best that we can. So that happened on April the 8th. Like I said, the governor had shut schools down for the rest of the year. So we had, the other thing that was coming up was, okay, how are we going to deal with seniors and graduation? And so that just happened. We had a virtual graduation on May the 29th at 7 p.m., which was when our normal in-person graduation was scheduled. And we did that like they might do it in a television studio. We had everybody that was involved in our regular ceremony individually come into our high school auditorium, and we had a videographer there that filmed the different sections of graduation and then put it all together with some music and some background and things like that. And then we broadcast it live at the time that we would have normally, well, we didn't broadcast it live, we broadcast it taped at the time when we would have normally had graduation. In addition to that, though, when we were developing graduation plans, we also decided that we will have an in-person graduation on August the 1st with social distancing protocols in place if the health department and if the state allow us to do that. So that's still yet to come. So this year's seniors, if it all works to plan, will have the opportunity to participate in 2 different graduation ceremonies. The reason we did that was because we wanted to make sure that they at least had something to mark the occasion. That was the virtual one. We feel like if we've got that one, then we can at least say that we did something for the kids if the state doesn't allow us to meet in person in any way, shape, or form, which was a possibility, especially when things were really ramping up in terms of caseload and our hospital capacity. Now it looks more like we're probably going to be able to do that. They can't say 100%. Cases could grow and they could tell us, no, you're not allowed to do that. So August 1st is our scheduled in-person graduation date. And then, of course, what we're working on right now is the fall and what are we going to do when we're supposed to start back to school. And I will tell you that right now, we think that we will be allowed to return to school on an in-person basis with social distancing protocols in place. What are those protocols? That's what we're figuring out right now. So, but that, when people ask me, what do you think we'll be doing in the fall? That's what I'm saying. I think we will be back to in-person instruction. It will be different. We will have things like temperature checks. We'll decide what we're going to do about mask wearing, social distancing, the lunchroom. Right now we've got a list of about 100 different items that we have to make decisions on, and there's going to be more than that by the time we get done in order to make that happen. But that's the road that we're headed on, at least right now. Now, this is still obviously a live situation. So I just got an email today that the governor and the State Department of Education will be coming out with recommendations here in the next couple of days, final recommendations for what happens in the fall. And that obviously is something that we've been waiting on because we want to make sure that we're in compliance with those as we develop plans for the fall. So I know that was long. I apologize, but I wanted to kind of run you through the timeline of what we've been dealing with. So with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
This is Morris Mills. What do you think the net effect of the learning to these kids will be 5 years from now on what you try to do during the season?
I think you will have, it depends on how well the kids adapted to distance learning. There will, we did have, a group of kids who did just fine, and I don't think they missed out on too much, other than I always think in-person instruction is better than distance instruction. But kids who struggle reading, kids who struggle with school in general, is pretty devastating. Making up for what they lost is going to be very difficult. We are talking about that right now, how we're going to need to form even more targeted groups of kids that need help with reading and math and those sorts of things to get them up to speed, so to speak, and make up for this gap. Because we do think that there will be gaps, if that answers your question.
Good job.
I got a question. What about fall sports and those kind of things? I mean, they haven't been able to work out this summer, I don't think. And I know they're doing virtual training on their own, but kids are so involved in so many things, it's hard to see them doing that kind of task. And I know my grandkids go to North Montgomery, so they had issues. They have some internet, but their bandwidth was so narrow sometimes that when they sent assignments in, they would fail or that kind of thing. Some things kind of went haywire on them.
No, and again, that's nobody's fault, right? But that's what I was talking about. If you don't have the bandwidth to do distance learning, boy, it makes it even tougher. Yeah, that's just an issue. And I'm not sure how they're going to address that if we have to do this again. Hopefully we don't have to do this again. Your main question about sports, the guidance that we're receiving is that we will be starting sports up again in July. So at the beginning of July. Now, again, there's going to be a whole litany of protocols in place. Hand washing. Some sports will do masks, where they can. Those sorts of things. But some sports you have to exert yourself too much, or those sorts of things, to where running cross country with a mask on is going to be really difficult. And cross country is one where, for the most part, you might be able to put some social distancing protocols in place, to at least to a certain extent, and you're outside. So it's going to move to kind of a case by case kind of a thing with all these things, where we're going to try to do the best we can to control the spread of COVID, but it's not going to be a full closure. So yeah, to answer your question, sports right now look like they're going to start up again in terms of practices in July.
Does football become flag football?
We have not heard that one. So the guidance that we've gotten from the IHSAA is that they've put sports into different categories depending on the level of contact and how much interaction that you have. As you can imagine, football is on the very highest level in terms of how close you are to somebody else and those sorts of things. So it's the last sport that can be opened, so to speak. So sort of just like we have the phases in Indiana for, now restaurants can have 50%. Sports are sort of the same way. But it's a matter of a week or two when they can do those things. Football is probably the toughest one, but from what I've seen from the guidance out of the IHSAA, as long as we're in the state that we're in right now, again, with number of cases, hospital loads, those sorts of things, football will not come back as flag football. It'll be regular football in some shape, form, or fashion. I don't know if they'll wipe the helmets out after every play or wipe down the football, or it's going to be those kind of things. That's the plan for right now, to try to basically just control it as best we can. But no, I've not seen anything that says, hey, we're going to move the flag for this year on football.
Have the internet companies in Crawfordsville continued to provide service to the low-income families? I wasn't aware that was happening. That was good of them.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. They have always made low-cost service available for low-income families, around $10 a month, something like that, if you qualified based on income. But I have not heard anything formally from them about what will happen in the fall, whether they will continue those plans for free, or whether that will be a limited time. I mean, I could tell you we would put pressure on them, but in some cases, I mean, you're dealing with an AT&T or Verizon who's not just going to listen to a local school corporation, but MetroNet is relatively local. They're not as big of a company. We would be putting pressure on them. I think they'll get a lot of pressure, honestly, if schools are having to go back to distance learning, to still offer those free services. But I haven't heard anything definitive on that at this point.
Dr. Bowling, this is Brian Donaldson. Just wondering if what you're hearing about once you do open up in the fall, if you get 1 or 2 cases, does that mean you have to close again?
Yeah, and that's one of the questions that we have on our list for the health department. What level of infection do we have to close a school? I'll have to give you a best guess on that, because I don't have those final recommendations. So this could change, just understand that. I think they will start treating this a little bit more like other diseases. And what I mean by that was, I kind of referenced it when I was talking. If we have an outbreak of stomach virus at a certain school, they can shut down that certain school. The health department can either direct it, or they can recommend it to us, and we can go ahead and pull the trigger. I think they'll be more vigilant, way more vigilant on this and so I think the threshold for making that call will be lower. with the stomach virus, usually it's 20%. Like if 20% of our kids do not come to school because they're sick with any given disease, they tell us, okay, you got to shut this down because you've got a real outbreak here, and it's too damaging, and so we have to shut down for a period of time. Again, I think their threshold for that will be much lower than 20%, but I also don't think it'll be one kid. I think if we get one kid that comes down with it, they will quarantine that student, and here's going to be the challenge for the fall. That student will then need to enter distance learning. And so that's what we're struggling with right now, is we know that we're going to have a system of both in-person instruction and distance learning at the same time. That's going to be a real struggle. We've got some ideas for how we're going to do that, but those are the ones that are keeping us up at night right now, is how would we provide instruction to that kid, because they're going to have to be quarantined for 14 days. This isn't a stomach bug where you have it for a day and you come back. So, that first kid gets it. I don't think they'll shut the school down. I don't. I think they will, that particular student would be quarantined. Any students that had a high level of contact with that student, and again, there's the question, how are they going to define that? I don't know. If it's students that kind of sat around that student, you could go anywhere from that to the whole school, has at least been in some close proximity. They may quarantine other students because of that one student, but I think that they will have the health department will have protocols in place to try to limit that spread, because that's what they've done with everything else. We've had an outbreak over at Acuity, and that's what they did. They quarantined the person that had it. They determined who had close contact with that person, and those people were quarantined as well. And that was the extent of it. I think a similar model will be used at school. Now, as the caseload rises, if you go from one kid and their contacts, and now we've got 5 kids and their contacts, and now we got 10 kids and their contacts, that's where you could get into a case where they would close the school. But I also think they'll be more targeted, again, just like they've been with with the stomach bug example that I gave. I think it's possible that they would shut down one of our schools where an outbreak would have occurred, but the others will stay going, because that is the normal protocol for all other infectious diseases. So I think it'll be that normal protocol, but just with a much lower threshold, if that makes sense.
Do you see, Dr. Bowling, this is Gary Bailing again, do you see class sizes decreasing because of the social distancing stuff?
So that's the big challenge. When we first started looking at reopening for the fall, there were a lot of plans coming out of other states that talked about, well, maybe you just bring in half the kids on Monday and spread them out, and then you bring in the other half of the kids on Tuesday. The state may yet tell us that we have to do that. And the way that they would do that is they would say, we're allowing schools to reopen, but you can only have 12 kids in a given classroom. If they do that, that is the most difficult scenario, as you could probably imagine, because now you do have teachers that are going to have to do both. We don't have enough teachers or classrooms to be able to do that. So, you think about it, let's just take Nicholson, which has about 200 kids and about 10 teachers. I'm sorry, 400 kids and 35 or so teachers. I was thinking about a grade level, not the whole school. Even when you only bring in half the kids, if you're going to put a teacher in every one of those classrooms, you need double the number of teachers. There's no additional funding coming with that. So I don't see that as highly likely to be mandated. So what I do think, though, is I do think some parents will not want to send their kids back to school, and we will have to have a plan to provide distance learning for those kids, and that's sort of the scenario that we're planning for right now. We think as high as 20% of parents may feel too uncomfortable to send their kids back, and we know we're going to have to provide an alternative for those kids, as well as any kids that get quarantined or sick. So we're going to have that distance learning as an option for certain groups of kids. But I do think I would like to try to avoid unless the state mandates doing the half and half thing, because I don't know how to do it with the current staffing that we had. If they tell us we have to, I'll figure it out, but it's going to be ugly. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions? Well, I guess, Dr. Bolin, before we leave, I guess, what do you an organization like Kiwanis and other organizations in town, what do you think we can do to help you and help? I tell you what, your people at the Key Club in the high school, just fantastic. And they've worked very, very hard. We'd like to work with them some more and help with that in some of your schools. And I just found out a neighbor is a principal at Hose. So, so we've got some ideas to maybe help and do some things. But what do you think that an organization like Kiwanis can do for the Crawfordsville School Corporation?
I would say, for your organization, find a point of contact, and that can be me, and keep asking that question. Okay. Because we could make a determination right now, this would be really good. Things have changed so rapidly that a month from now, I wish we would have done this other thing.
Sure.
Because, either this got taken care of, or it ended up becoming a different issue altogether. So, like, if I go back, what we could have used help with during the distance learning time was it might have been nice for kids to have sort of an online tutoring system for parents who may have themselves struggled academically, or just like me, even though I'm a math teacher, forgot how to do algebra 2 and had to relearn it when I was trying to help my daughter with it. If you had that sort of resource, that sort of comes to mind. But again, we're planning on going back to school as normal in the fall. Right. So, I wouldn't want to get going too far ahead of that. But I guess that's what I would recommend is, find a point of contact with any of the local schools, let them know that you're available. And then just listen to the news about what's happening with schools and across the country, and think as an organization, how can we, because I need ideas too.
Sure.
Because sometimes we get so focused on, down in the weeds with this thing. If there are bigger picture ideas, well, the food delivery thing is a great example. I mean, even though that came internally, that's not where my head was. It was on a lot of other things. And we did, even before we did food delivery, we had the school sites open for people to come and get it, but we just hadn't moved the delivery yet. Well, that was a great idea that somebody brought to me, and we had people willing to do it. That's the sort of thing I would recommend, just a relationship like that, to where we can react quickly to issues as they present themselves. I told somebody recently that, this is sort of like, if you've ever heard the quote about the fog of war, that I feel like that's what this situation is. You're not exactly sure what's going to be coming at you next. And, but once you find out, you sort of have to react quickly with limited information and with not knowing whether you're making the right decision or not. So, being nimble like that, I think is the right spot to be right now. That's my opinion.
Yeah, one of the things we found out in talking with other Kiwanis groups around the country, because we've all been doing this Zoom thing or other types, and so we've been sitting in on some of the other clubs, and it's amazing some of the things that are going on. And I think there are other ideas around the country and things that we can help with and talk about. So we'd love to meet with you, I'm sure, down the road here a little bit and see what we can do.
Yeah, and that's a great that's a great example. If there are ideas coming out of other Kiwanis organizations that have proved effective, that we can bring to the table here in Crawfordsville, that's perfect.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Jerry, anything else?
No, Scott, a really, really interesting presentation. It's hard to believe that, we've been dealing with this now for close to 90 days, and kind of a retrospective look at it was very interesting to me. and to kind of get a picture about, you know, the thought processes that you all went through. It's a challenge for sure. We have one of our own, our annual Pancake Day fundraiser we had to cancel, which was scheduled for the 19th of March. And we had it tentatively rescheduled for September 24th, but lots of questions about how do we pull it off? How do you socially distance in a building, you know, like the 4-H building, and will it be more of a delivery kind of thing this year? And there's a lot of open switches, so we can commiserate with you and know that there's a lot of thinking through that's going to have to be done, and knowing that, you know, a curveball could get thrown at us all, and all of that thinking goes out the window, and we're kind of back to square one.
You described, I couldn't have described it any better. You're exactly right.
I hope that doesn't happen, but I think we all have to be prepared that that eventuality may hit us in the face. So again, thanks for your time today. It was very interesting. I don't have anything else on the list here. Closing thought, the only thing I can think really is, you know, continue to be safe. Wear a mask when you're out in public. If not for others, why, or not for yourself, but, you know, for protection of others. Continue the hand washing thing over and over and over again, and just use common sense. And I think, you know, we can get through this with minimal anguish. I'll unmute the mics at this point, and if you all want to visit for a little bit, that'll be great. Thanks for coming this week. Our speaker next week is going to be Judge Heather Barajas. So that should be fairly interesting as well. So you all have a good week. Let me get the mic unmuted here, and thanks for tuning in.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dr. Bowling. Thank you very, very much for your visit and information.